You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record. On the morning of July 18, 2014, Florida State University law professor Dan Markel dropped off his two young sons at preschool and headed to the gym for his morning workout. As Markel exited the gym and headed home, a light green Prius followed his car. Dan was just finishing up a cell phone call as he pulled into his garage, telling the person on the other end of the line that he was being approached by someone he didn't recognize. Dan's neighbor, Jim Geiger, heard shots ring out and went next door to investigate. Geiger found Markel clinging on to life in the front seat of his car. Geiger told 911 operators that he had seen a light-colored Prius fleeing the scene. Using surveillance footage and rental records of the Prius, law enforcement were able to identify two Miami men as Markel's murderers, Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. On October 4, 2016, Luis Rivera, the getaway driver, negotiated a plea deal where he agreed to cooperate with law enforcement in exchange for a 19-year prison sentence. Rivera, a gang member with the Latin Kings, told investigators that the middle woman was Catherine Katie Magbanua, the shooter, Sigfredo Garcia's baby mama. At the time of Dan's murder, Magbanua was dating Dan Markel's ex-wife's Wendy's brother, Charlie Adelson. Rivera claimed he had been told by Rivera that they had been hired by Markel's ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. Adelson and her family had developed a passionate hatred for Dan Markel and desperately wanted to move Wendy and her and Dan's two children to Miami. A judge had denied this request. Rivera's confession echoed the interrogations of Jeffrey Lacasse, Wendy Adelson's most recent ex-boyfriend. Lacasse told police that Wendy had made a joke that her brother had bought her a TV because it was, quote, cheaper than hiring a hitman, unquote. Interestingly, Wendy's alibi for the day of the murder was that she was at home awaiting the TV repairman. Lacasse also claimed that shortly before Wendy ended their relationship, she told him that her brother had looked into hiring a hitman for either $15,000 or $50,000. He couldn't be sure on the amount. Lacasse implored law enforcement to look into Wendy's brother, Charlie Adelson. Despite being a wealthy dentist, Lacasse observed Adelson was a creepy guy who liked socializing with the criminal element in Miami. The shooter, Sigfredo Garcia, and the middle woman, Katie Magbanua, were tried together in 2019. On October 11, 2019, Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. As for Magbanua, the jury could not come to an agreement, and a mistrial was declared. On May 27, 2022, Magbanua was found guilty of first-degree murder as well as solicitation and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. In April of 2022, Wendy's brother Charlie Adelson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder as well as conspiracy and solicitation to murder. He is being held without bail awaiting trial. Magbanua is currently in negotiations with the state in what's called a pro-offer. Magbanua will exchange her knowledge of the crime and cooperation in exchange for a reduced prison sentence. Today's guest is Dan Markel's mother, Ruth Markel, who has written a powerful and moving new book published by Post Hill Press entitled The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial Life. President of the management consulting firm R&M Enterprises and author of 9 books, Mrs. Markel has appeared on the podcast Over My Dead Body, ABC's 2020, and Dateline, just to name a few. Welcome, Ruth Markel.
Introduction to what we would think would have been a very acceptable young woman.
Did you get that feeling like Jeffrey Lacasse? I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly.
Yes,
Lacasse, is it? Lacasse? He says that she's incredibly charismatic. Did you feel that she was very charismatic?
Yes, she has, but now we learned later she's a great actress, right?
Right.
She oozes this warmth. And I'm so glad he's describing all this, because to some extent this was many, many years later, but our experience as well. She comes across initially as engaged. She could, now it might be acting, but she can, keeps the eye contact on. She moves her body forward, and she is, you feel that she's warm. I mean, you have no reason to doubt this at the beginning. And sure, maybe she's being extra warm, let's call it. It's their first introduction, so she knows she's, everyone might be looking at her or whatever. But really, that's true what he said. It is true. She's a charmer.
Can you talk a little bit about how Dan accommodated Wendy in the beginning of the relationship? They seem to have these differences, like, say, for food.
Sure.
And there's an age difference, and he seemed to really go out of his way to accommodate her.
Very much so. So Dan was very much interested in family life. He also, from a young adolescent, let's call him, had a strong Jewish identity. He wasn't religious, which means he observed the Saturday, not with all the rules. He wanted to have a family life that centered around being Jewish, but he drove on Saturday. He used electricity on Saturday. He was not that religious. He did want, though, in terms of as the children were, after they were born, that they should be brought up having kosher food. And that was one of the things that they both agreed on. Danny and Wendy agreed. She agreed when the children were born. So he didn't put any imposition on Wendy in any way. She could have outside the home whatever they wanted. Their house initially was vegetarian when they were first married, so there were not even any issues. They both agreed that the children should be brought up kosher. And Danny went frequently to either services on Friday night or Saturday morning in the synagogue. And Wendy could go to the gym. She was free. She was, younger in the sense that she just was getting out of university, having a young family early. And in that respect, it's nice for her to have some of her own time. And he was very, very accommodating to that.
Why do you feel Wendy Adelson's book, This Is Our Story, which was promoted as an account of one woman's fight against human trafficking, why do you feel that was a thinly veiled account of her marriage?
I haven't been the one to necessarily say that. It became known as that, right? She wrote this book while they were still married and describes one of the characters plus the lawyer in the book as having concerns about where she's living and so forth. So I think that book, people became more interested in it after Danny was murdered. I think we should say that he was murdered, because I'm not sure if your listeners really know that backup story. And that was when that book became even more useful, because of the fact that while she still was married to him, she refers to the character as maybe not being so committed to the marriage already.
You say that Donna became sort of a third wheel in the marriage. You reference Princess Diana. This is something that Jeffrey Lacasse says, that Wendy wouldn't let her drive long distances. Were you familiar with that? Or is that something?
No, all this is true. Donna, it's true, but Donna, let's talk about Donna separate from Jeffrey for a minute. Look, Donna started on J-Date, and I told you one thing which was important to Dan, which was that the family life had some Jewish tradition. Mm-hmm. And Donna really did not respect Dan's interest in, his strong interest in the faith, not that it affected her in any way. And what she did is actually both Wendy and Dan at the beginning, when the children were in preschool, they would bring tofu, hot dogs, falafel. So in other words, non-meat meals for the children, while the other kids were having regular hot dogs, beef, which was unkosher beef, let's call it. And Donna just decided, and she told the preschool people, let the kids eat whatever you're serving. Like, she just sabotaged. And that's the whole beginning of the deterioration because of the food issues. And later on, Donna wanted the kids to move to South Florida. This becomes the two major reasons. And the two reasons, when I say that it was similar, there were three people in the marriage, and that was Donna pushing herself into Wendy and Dan's private life in such an intense degree. And that was just very, very disruptive. And at the same time, I think what you're saying about Jeff Cass said, that Donna, they also try to, and this is talked about a lot today, I'm not saying for me, but to infantilize her more, so that's where Jeff would say that instead of driving herself back to see her parents in Florida, they always drove up to Florida and then drove back with her to see them in South Florida. They drove to Tallahassee.
Why did Dan file a motion to protect Donna from making disparaging comments about their fathers to their two sons, Lincoln and Benjamin? And when was that hearing supposed to be held?
Okay, that was going to be held in 2014. So I'll back up a little. So they had a terrible separation in 2012, a very difficult divorce in 2013. And after the divorce, there were a lot of kind of going back and forth on, the available times for the children to spend with the father and the mother. It was very clear it was equal. But as an example, when Wendy went out of town, she's supposed to inform Dan, and Dan, the natural parent, gets the first right. And she never did, and she would always allow Donna and Harvey to babysit. So that, excuse my language, pissed off Danny. Now, so then what happened was Donna decided that before the divorce already, this was a talk, why one of the causes of the divorce, that they all have to move to South Florida. And South Florida they're in Tallahassee, and Donna lives in Coral Springs in Florida, so like Miami area, let's call it. And this was a major disruption. So at the time of the divorce, just before it legally finalized, Wendy wrote, through Donna's initiation, a petition to the court to have Danny allow them to move to Florida, South Florida. Well, I would say Florida, I mean Coral Springs area. And the judge threw it out. So the judge did not allow them to move. The geographic distance that they were proposing was not something that the judge felt was good for the children. The children have two loving parents. Have jobs in Florida State University. And the grandparents do not trump the natural parents' right, like Danny's, to become the caregivers. So that bumped Donna against the wall, pushed her against the wall. And that was where she became very angry. And subsequent to that, and before that too, she would tell the children, Abba dislikes you, that your father dislikes you, and he's stupid, and we're going to take my sunshines away, and so forth. So that's when Danny, later on, in 2014, decided, okay, he's going to, under the basis of their agreement, their divorce and marriage agreement, there's no disparaging of the natural parent, which she was doing. So this becomes like under parental alienation, right, under the actual divorce laws and agreements. And he said that he was looking for Donna to have only supervised visits with the boys because of what she was saying about him, how she was disparaging him.
And that hearing was supposed to happen about a month or two before, right?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. About 4 months. It was actually scheduled for March, but then they rescheduled it to April, May. But yes, that was important.
The question that kept coming into my mind reading your book was, had Dan moved to Miami, had he said, okay, forget the kosher, not that he would have, but forget the kosher food or whatever, I had this feeling that they would have picked something else. You know what I'm saying? It just seemed to be not just about control, but about a group. Like, we're the family and you're not in it, and we're going to make, do you know what I mean? I don't know. I can't explain it any more than this kind of, I don't know. I thought of them as like a royalty or something, like the Adelsons royalty, and everybody else wasn't good enough. That's what I felt reading the book and looking at other material.
I think they would have made other issues, let's call it, at the time. Look, it was highly conflictual, there's no question, but they could have resolved some of the things, right? Danny even was looking at either commuting back and forth, like taking a position, even in Miami at one time, full time, and then also could have commuted. He was prepared to be more flexible. He didn't want, even after the separation, which was a horrific experience, he wanted to still keep the family together. But I think at a certain point, Wendy had made up her mind. I think, and no matter what, Donna for sure had made up her mind, because they already called him gibbers. They had all these nicknames against him and so forth. So I think it was past the point of an agreeable resolution.
What were some of the suggestions that Donna gave Wendy to convince Dan to move the kids to Miami?
Well, she became very, very overextended, over-involved, that no matter what, if they weren't going to move there, that Wendy had to do 3-4 things, okay? And one of them was, and this is how nuts the whole situation became, that Wendy should tell Danny that she's going to bring the children up Catholic, okay? And that she should dress them up in Hitler uniforms and just crazy. So that was one theme, which Wendy, thank God, did not listen to. The second was where they should offer him $1 million to let the kids move to South Florida. And she proposed that they split that between Wendy and Donna and Harvey and Charlie. She knew he's not going to take money. I think it is the only times where you see, Wendy strongly, sort of not agreeing with Donna on all these major themes.
Some true crime observers have suggested that Wendy's alibi of fixing her TV has more to do, her TV being repaired the day of Dan's murder. Can you talk about that theory a little bit?
Yes, well, the theory is that on the morning of Dan's murder, it's actually who Donna arranged for a person from TV to come to fix a TV that was in her house, and that would give Wendy an alibi if she was involved with these are the theories, right? Why was there a TV person in her house? So this way Wendy has an alibi that she was home and that morning. And so that's one of the things. The TV becomes very important for another reason. I'm sure you read this already, is that Wendy says to the TV repairman when he's there, which is, again, crazy. My brother said, I'm going to give you this divorce gift, the TV, which is cheaper than hiring a hitman. So the hitman conversation comes in with a TV repairman, which is really crazy. And this poor guy has to come to the trials later and actually confirm that was the reality. So, there's so many scenarios that you can. This terrible story, my grief, my experiences, being a victim are horrific, but beats fiction. I don't think anybody can even create this level of, of drama, intrigue, and whatever.
I really missed the boat with this story. I had no idea. And it's one of the most incredible true crime stories that I've ever encountered. Well, for one, it goes on so long. There's so many people involved and it's so psychological. There's so many different elements and everybody can relate to it because everybody's had a family. Keeps going on. Yeah. And I can imagine that being extremely difficult for you. It just seems to just go on. And it seems like until everybody involved is arrested. And you originally encountered some resistance with the state's attorney.
Right?
No, not so. Wasn't the first, no. Not Georgia Kappelman, but wasn't his name Meg? Didn't he not want to charge?
Meg. No, let's go back.
Okay, thank you.
So this is important. I'll talk a little bit about the crime part of it. It's what's called a murder for hire. Okay, and a murder for hire has already had 3 people now. So Garcia, who is known as the shooter,
right? He
was arrested in May 2016 and convicted in 2019 for life. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's him. Then there's Luis Rivera, who was the driver.
Right.
And he plea bargained, and he brought in Catherine McBanawa, right, who was the go-between,
right,
who brought the money. And she was not only Garcia's, this is why I say you can write fiction, you can't beat this. So she was Garcia's, not a common law wife, let's call it, had 2 children with him.
Right.
Their marriage was up and down, and then she dated Charlie Adelson, and so that brings in the Adelson. So when all these people were arrested, here's the part there was a probable affidavit, okay, which named, so when Garcia's arrest happened, a probable affidavit named Charlie Adelson and Donna Adelson as unindicted co-conspirators, okay, so this goes back all the way to 2016. And then the state attorney's office, his name was Willie Meggs. He was still the state attorney. He was just about to retire. But the point here was he was against bringing in all the family, meaning Donna and Charlie even at that time, at the same time that the arrests were going. And that became a controversy right in the case from day one. Why were certain people arrested only first and the others, so they didn't walk because Charlie Adelson's in jail now, but they were freer and so forth. So the case has politics. It's this heavy-duty politics, this case, and it's not glitzy. And let me talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the victim. Can I say that? Like you
Sure,
now
please do. I have one question, and then I'm not going actually right into that. So I just have one last question about Luis Luvera took plea deal in 2015. Garcia was convicted in the same trial as Katie's trial. Is that where they tried?
For the first trial, they were together in 2019. The mistrial.
Right, and she got a mistrial. Why do you think that trial ended in a mistrial? What was the difference between her getting convicted and not? You attended both trials. Was there a significant difference?
The difference were because she had young children, and some of the jurors were sympathetic to the fact that, she had young children, and, they weren't sure or convinced yet from their interpretation of the evidence that she should go for life. That was the first time. The second time, which is different already, and they also felt there's we have all these levels of politics here too, that the wrong people were in jail. Now, in the second trial now, which just happened in May 2022, 2022 is a big year, Charlie Adelson was arrested April 21st. So you can't use the excuse anymore about the evidence against Catherine McBanawa that it's only the low-level people were put in jail, because now we're moving to the second stage. And they, on the basis of the evidence and so on, and it was clearly presented, and there was new evidence, which she was a participant in, which is the Dolce Vita enhancement video, where she's there with Charlie Adelson. So with those new pieces of evidence, the juror had less problems at all in terms of her convictions for co-conspirator and for solicitation of murder. Life is always hard, so there was still deliberations, but she was totally convicted for everything, for life.
And you wrote 2 victim impact statements, and you were allowed to read 1. What do you feel was left out? What do you feel that you wanted to express? The judge, for time reasons, allowed you to read one victim impact statement. What do you feel that you wanted to express?
No, I'll just correct you there.
Okay, thank you.
So Shelley and Dan's father, Phil, we all wrote victim impact statements. The judge, well, not even the judge, actually, the person who was Georgia Kaplan works with her, he said, look, it might be too much if the 3 of you read them. So only one of us read it. So that was for the first part. Then for the death penalty part, we had another opportunity to read the victim impact statements, but it was already where the point was where we felt as a family that should have been maybe Shelley or Phil, who might have wanted to read their impact statement for sentencing for the death penalty, because they're different. And at the time, I think they declined because we were moving, right into the next phase of the trial. So that's really what happened. But I wasn't displeased that just that the family had prepared for the first time. Everybody prepared. And it's I didn't like the experience of writing a victim impact statement, because you've got to go back and revisit the wounds. And it's like opening up, everything again. This is the difficulty.
You call this book The Unveiling. It references your son's tombstone unveiling, but you also write that you want to expose trial life as a victim. What do you want people to know about what it's like as a victim to go to trial?
Well, the first part I do want to talk about, the book is called The Unveiling. It's a mother's reflection on murder, grief, and trial life. So the reason the title is there's 2 parts, as you mentioned, but I want to not run away from the grief before I really describe the victim experience, because what happened for me is that prior to the actual ceremony of the unveiling, which was about 8-9 months after the funeral, I was in a daze. I had totally shock, and I had an out-of-body experience. But it was just prior to the unveiling that I started to feel the finality of the death, because the tombstone gets placed on the gravesite for the special ceremony 9 months, in our case 9 months. A fabric is put over it, and it was seeing the actual tombstone on the gravesite that made me really realize this is it. The expression, it's the last nail in the coffin. And that's when my real grief started. So that's one of the reasons. Now, symbolically, why I wrote the book and called it The Unveiling for the Public is to lift the curtain. If you can picture a piece of fabric with an inscription on a tombstone, the whole purpose is to lift the curtain and show the public, what does it feel like to be a victim in a crime situation and in a murder. We're not talking street crime alone, but in a murder. So the victim experience has two parts to it. One is psychological and one is the criminal system. And I'm going to explain it to you. So the first part is a homicide survivor is something that is not talked about enough. Okay, homicide survivor is a specialized psychological trauma that occurs from sudden violent death and the finality of it. And it has a different course than other kinds of loss or trauma. So that's the psychological component. The second part of the victim experience is the victim is, in Canada, we have an expression about describing it. The victim is the orphan in the criminal system. What does it mean? The victim is not have a frame of reference from day one. Just look at the defendant. They go in, they give their DNA, they get all their blood work done to trace them and so forth. What happens to the victim? They're left floating. So the victim experience is a very fluid, and I would call it a foreign language in a foreign country. You don't know the terms and so forth. And then you have victim impact statements, which what people really know, but the public sees the victim impact statements, but they don't see the victim in the crime scene. They don't see the victim at the trial where you're facing the offenders and all kinds of other parts of this difficult journey. But more specifically, what's this trauma about? It's the interaction of the psychological and the legal of the criminal system. And this makes it different than any other course of trauma. And that's what I'm trying to show the public. It's not, and especially our case, it's glitzy, it's glamorous. There's been 2 hours, 2 times on Dateline to 2020. This is a real kind of well-known case if you dig, beyond, the front of Google, let's call it. But we're here, we're suffering. Then all these people from the school shootings, they're going to be suffering, those that have deaths. So I really want to talk about that whole experience.
Do you feel in some ways that part of the victimization continues because it becomes entertainment? In some ways, becomes a 2020 special, it becomes a podcast?
No, and I think in our case, I have to say out loud, the media in our case is a privilege and it's very helpful. And we've been having very, very collaborative relationships. There was only one time where the media, let's call it, overstretched itself, which was at the time of the funeral in Toronto, where they hid in the bushes. The paparazzi had to get that picture. But that's really been our only negative. Now I have to say it's exceptional, our relationships with the media. And any, what you would call re-traumatization comes really from the trial. It's not the media in our situation, but it's at the trials. There's hearings, there's trials, there's continuances, there's changes, there's appeals. The public doesn't see all that. And Catherine was convicted, just to give you the chronology, Catherine was convicted in May 2022. In July 2022, there was sentencing. My daughter Shelley went public and she did a victim impact statement. As a mother, it's horrific to watch your child do a victim impact statement on a sibling. And I'm just showing you the behind the scenes sadness. Then after that, Catherine appeals her conviction. That's where we are right now. She's appealing. And then we have now Charlie Adelson, who was arrested, which was terrific for us. He was supposed to have a hearing December 2nd, a case management for when his trial will be in 2023, but it's now December 16th.
The delays are intense and an increase because of COVID. You also experienced alienation from your grandkids. Can you talk about that?
Yes, what happened was the first 2 years after Danny was murdered, we did visit with Wendy and the children. And then after the arrest, Wendy cut us off. I was very concerned that it was possible that somebody in the family could be walking the children to school. And suddenly there was an arrest, and the Department of Family and Children's Services could come in and intervene. So I wanted to make sure that none of that happened. And then she cut me off. She cut us off, not just me, but she would have done anyway. And we didn't speak or see the children for 6 years. And then here's where the positive part of my journey goes from, grief to advocacy, to promise, to outcome. I actually I can't believe I did it. But in 2019, what happened was, even in 2016, when we started to lose the contact with the children, our lawyers in New York, who've helped us a lot from Gibson and Dunham, Matt Benjamin said, Ruth, you have to write a bill. I said, Bill, I'm sitting in Toronto. I'm going to write a bill for Florida. That kind of thing. And then my other American friends, right away, you're going to have to get it right away, a lobbyist and a this and a that. I couldn't do anything. But after Garcia's trial in 2019, I was in Tallahassee and I met this young woman. Her name is Karen Halprin Cyphers. And she came over to me and she said, as a friend, we went for coffee. She said, what can I do for you? And then I blurted out I was ready. Grandparent alienation. And they developed a bill in Florida, and we just had Governor DeSantis sign it in June 24th of 2022. So, here you are. You never know. So that's the better part of my journey. In terms of, there is something about resiliency. There is something about redefining yourself. There is something about taking on bigger ventures and so forth.
When did you last see your grandchildren?
Well, that became very interesting. So the bill passes the House and the Senate in March of 2022. And then Catherine McManaman's trial was supposed to be February, but it was continued to May 16th because of the opportunity that they felt they had from enhancing this video, the Dolce Vita video, which was the evidence against Charlie Addison. So all of a sudden, at the end of February, I get an email, which I haven't heard from Wendy, and she says, Benjamin, the older child, is having a bar mitzvah. Now, I hadn't seen them for 6 years, and so she's saying we're all invited, which means Shelley's children as well, in May 14th, just before the trial, to this bar mitzvah. And I said, sure, we're coming. And then as we processed a little bit, I said, the kids haven't seen us. I wrote her an email. I said, can we have an ice cream visit the day before? 45 minutes. I just put a time limit. Just, they're seeing these people in the back of the synagogue. Who are they? Or the temple, that kind of thing.
Right.
Anyway, she wrote us back, if you want an in-person visit, come in April, because this was March already. And we said, sure. And we went April 20th, and Phil and I went to see the children. We had a great visit. We got on the plane to come back to Toronto. And in the morning, 6 a.m., I get a call from the FBI. Charlie Adelson is arrested. So in 24 hours, we had 2 breakthroughs in the case.
Wow.
Which was the grandchildren and Charlie Adelson. And then what happened 3 days later, Wendy wrote us that we're disinvited to the bar mitzvah because for feelings of safety, and she was going to change the format, to Zoom and so forth. So we saw them in April. And that's been the last time that we saw them in person. And I'm hoping to go to South Florida and maybe see them sort of around the Christmas period.
She changed the children's name, she says, for safety. The safety issue is always this kind of thing that hangs over this case. So now that everybody is talking about Katie's pro-offer or what she might say, you don't have to say, but do you know anything? Are you hearing anything about that?
Nothing is happening that I can tell you. So everybody, the speculation is huge. She left the prison that she was in another area of Florida, and she's up in Tallahassee right now. And there's total speculation on everything about everything, but there has not been any movement yet on the pro-offer.
You talk about Abe. Is that how you pronounce it? Anhag?
Yes. Here, let's go back. Matt Price was Danny's best man at the wedding. That's and the father-in-law of Matt Price. His name is Abe Anhang. And his son, Adam Anhang, was also murdered. And he became, referred to him as and if people read the book, The Unveiling, they could see it's something that you'll never see again. A murder coach, really, how he helped me. And I kept quoting him in the book at the different stages. And it was very, very significant, his support.
What was the most significant thing he told you? As someone who reports on trials, goes to trials, I found it very interesting that you wanted to sit in the front row, that you were very, very concerned about how you looked, what you said. It just blew my mind. You're being watched. You're right. You're being watched, and you have to be careful. What were some of the more valuable things that he taught you?
It was him who said, make sure you realize you should sit in the front row but also realize we weren't quite in the front row because the media was in front of us, but that's not the point. All the jurors are going to just be following you all the time. And that was very good advice, and it turned out to be true. So, they do observe your reactions, and you shouldn't talk too much among yourself. Not only that, but it was, in our case, it wasn't so much for the jurors also. In front of us was all the media. The first 3 rows of the court, in this case, were used for the media because they had to take, the agreement was one broadcaster would get all of the trial records, recordings, and the visuals, but they had to share it with everybody because everybody's live streaming at the same time. So in a sense, it's an obstruction, the big equipment in front of the family to the jurors. But the real reality, another reality, is whatever you say, they're in front of you, and you can make one, or they ask you a little question, and right away it's broadcasted. So you have to be careful.
I mean, some of this testimony in this trial was like hard to believe. That would be the nice way, nice way to put it. Did you ever have to leave because it was just like so outrageous? Some of the things that were being said. I'm not talking about disturbing things, just like, oh, I'm thinking of Katie saying scenarios like 50,000 times. She kept saying, well, he's talking scenarios. And it's like, it's not working, Katie. It's not working. Like, did you ever feel frustrated, or did you just feel like, oh, they're digging their own grave? Keep going.
I know you feel different things. Well, I'll start with the real troublesome stuff is actually the first day when they show the worst part, and the hardest part is they show the autopsy and medical exam. I leave. I don't stay. I can't watch it. I don't want a visual of anything. And so you're starting off knowing, some of the most important evidence is very traumatic, like to see all the crime scene and everything else. So that's not for me. The others stay. I just don't want to have the visual image of any part of, Danny's being, his body being whatever. That's the most, upsetting is the right word, part of it. And the rest of it is actually, it gets very interesting. And I'll tell you this why. And it's a little bit, the book 1984, this trial was very data driven. It's almost 9 years ago. As much as there were witnesses, but the cell phone towers became critical in doing all the wiretappings. They did a bump, a sting. There was a rental car that left the Miami area to go up to Tallahassee. So they had all of the reports from when you go through the tolls. And then there's all of the videos from the buses that trace the car. So this is really like, talk about your privacy. This was before, if you'd ever thought about.
It made you think about your privacy and just like, who's watching me go through the toll, right?
Everything. And the compliment to the police for what they did. I mean, this is really hard work. And so that you are at the same time, like, you're very upset about certain things. I mean, this other stuff really, the cell towers are here. The cars are there. They're talking, who's talking to who, and all of that is tracked. And the wiretapping, which there was a lot of in this case. So there's other parts of the roster of witnesses, let's call it. They're interesting because they're new, like this is a new experience type of thing. And there's other things that other people wait. The only one who I was most anxious for in the first trial was Rivera, because he became a key witness, and he's a Latin king, whatever they call it, Latin gang king. And then you think, okay, I'd pray he's credible. And he was. So that was the one where I was honestly the most anxious about.
Is there anything that could be changed to make these trials better for victims and victims' families?
Yes, I have a lot of things about, this is my next agenda, as I call it, whether it's for law students, for defense lawyers, and others. Really a whole agenda of developing compassion, and how to acknowledge the victim, where to acknowledge. But I would say more the language. One of the things is when the jurors get the day of their deliberation, they get about a 12-page document. The victims should get something like that from day one. There's a lot of criminal terms that you learn on the way, but they shouldn't be so ad hoc. So I would say yes, I have a lot of suggestions.
And would you be moving to change the laws in America or Canada or at both places?
Let me tell you about the laws in the States. There's something called, which is for victims. It already happened. There's, in California, there is a terrible case where a young woman was murdered by her boyfriend, and she was Marcy Nicholas. There's something called Marcy's Law, Marcy''S, and it's very significant. And actually, Florida adopted it in the middle of this case in 2019. There are things that are there, and Marcy's Law is one of them. There's other things about victims' rights. There's something I recently found out about. I didn't kind of affiliate with yet, but there's a lot of things like parents of murdered children. I haven't liaisoned with them or anything, but there are a lot of other opportunities to see what else can be done.
You write in the acknowledgments, I have learned everything about resiliency from my mother. And you also mention your uncle Lazar, who showed me how hope and optimism results in persistence and tenacity. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. And I'd love to, because I think, in my case, I'm very fortunate with certain role models. My mother became a widow at 38 years old in 1954. All right. And just to put it in perspective, there were just 2 children in a big elementary school who were not in a full intact family. So one other young woman who was in my grade as well, my class, and her mother was divorced, and there was just 2 of us, right? And just to put this in perspective, this is 1954. Brady Bunch and all those programs came out in 1968 only on TV. And if you look at, some of that, and you go back, and they weren't even sure they wanted to put on yet a single mother. So I'm trying to show you a context of 1954 when I'm 9 years old, and my mother, who was a stay-at-home mother, had an amazing metamorphosis, let's call it, and she became this phenomenal, strong businesswoman with her 2 brothers and went into business. So this is my mother's story. So I had a total experience of growing up of mastery. Now I have another very good experience, which was from my uncle. My mother's 38, her younger brother's 35. And this is rare. And he steps in like the father figure in our lives. And he stays with us, so to speak, not in the same house, but affiliated until we are married. I was married first from my brother. So this is exceptional. So, and it's interesting, this part of young death, both Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert, they talk about it, that their fathers died when they were exactly the same age as I am or was. And they talk about how they felt responsible to kind of bring up their mother, or to not just bring her up. I don't mean it in an upbringing kind of a way, but they felt responsible to make sure she's okay. Now, I didn't have that experience. And I'm blessed because my uncle stepped in. And my friends, as we all grew up, everybody knew Uncle Lazar as the father figure. And that was one reason. And then my uncle was saved, very important part of his story, in the Holocaust. When the Germans came in to evict the people in his town, he was out for area for that day. And then as he approached back, and this is a good story of the Holocaust and the Lithuanian people, who said, these are Gentile families, who said, walk 3 miles and so will save you, which is what happened. So he has a very strong thing about never give up, because his whole persona is he made it through the Holocaust. He was hidden in a barn, but that's not his memory. Is you don't have to see everything negatively. So this is my background. I feel in my life, I have 2 words. I've had a lot of trauma, but I've had gifts. And that's really my whole life experience.
And that's what you really get from this book is just, Dan was so outgoing and so interested in people and involved and on the playing field of life. And it seems like that is also true for your family. And there's all these angels who come out of nowhere to kind of a community of people to really help you get through it. It's a fantastic book. Ruth Markel. Book The Unveiling is out now on Post Hill Press. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it.